Today's lesson is all about adventure, danger, a little bit of luck, and the quest for fortune, because we are talking about the California Gold Rush. We're going to focus on 5 subtopics of conversation, and they are here below. So let's take a closer look. We'll start with where was gold first found and by whom, the greater location of the gold rush, all of the people involved and where they came from, the gold itself and how much was found, as well as the lasting impacts on American society. So let's start at the very beginning. So in January 1848, gold is first discovered at Sutter's Mill in California. And here's a vintage postage stamp with a sketch of the mill. And if you actually visited there today, there is a recreation that was built based off of John Sutter's original mill plans, which is pretty cool. It's important to realize that nobody was looking deliberately for this gold. It was total happenstance that it was found. So who found it exactly? Well, James Wilson Marshall was working for John Sutter as a construction worker, a laborer, and he's digging for gold one day, and he looks down and he sees a nugget of gold in the ground, and he's in a state of shock, and he says, "It made my heart thump, for I was certain it was gold." But he's also in a state of disbelief, too good to be true, right? So he does what any rational man would, and he decides to test it out. He smashes it against a rock to see if it will shatter, as many stones would. But it doesn't. It just flattens out. And one property of gold is that it's very, very soft. He does a chemical reaction test and has it boiled with lye and confirms it's the real deal. He tells John Sutter about it. They maybe try to keep it under wraps, but their excitement is too much to contain, so it doesn't stay a secret for very long. Word gets out, and some people come to the region, but actually a lot of people are skeptical. No way, they're pulling our leg, they're up to something. It's gotta be a ploy or a plot, too good to be true. But the US government confirms, no, people, this is really gold, and it was found in California. So when that happens, people flock to the state. It's important to know, though, just for a little bit of historical context, that this gold is found days before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed. But why does this matter? So this treaty gave control of California to the United States. Previously, it was Mexican territory. After the treaty, it's U.S. territory. So America can lay claim to all of the land where the gold is being found. So let's look at that land. California is a big state, so where exactly did the gold rush happen? It occurs in the Sacramento Valley. So if you think of California as an arm with a bicep and a forearm, the Sacramento Valley is in the inner elbow, the crook of the arm. You could take a closer look here, and this map points out where Sutter's Mill was located, as well as the American River, where this gold was first found. So when the government says, yeah, it's gold on American land, people rush to the west to try and find gold for themselves. And can you blame them? The non-native population goes from a mere 1,000 people to 80,000 in 1 year's time. That growth is huge, especially considering it's not an easy feat to get from the eastern United States all the way out west. What's more remarkable, in my mind, though, is that this growth continues. And within 5 years, the non-native population exceeds 300,000 people. Think about the lasting effect that might have on the landscape and the culture and lives of people who have been there for tens or hundreds of thousands of years. But this isn't the whole story. We should really look at who exactly travels out west and where they come from. So California becomes the proverbial melting pot. People literally from across the globe come to California in search of gold. These groups include Americans, Californians who are non-native individuals that lived in California before it was controlled by America, so people from Latin America, Mexicans, Chinese, indigenous peoples, as well as a lot of Europeans from places like Germany and England and France. But when you have population growth, there are other issues that start to bubble up. Issues related to diversity, though diversity is good, right? There are some negative things that happen. Issues of inequity and also, sadly, cruelty. So let's investigate those further. So people from all walks of life come to California, which is really great. You've got wealthy individuals that want to get wealthier, people from lower working classes, and people who are impoverished that think they can move out. They've got nothing to lose and maybe they'll strike it rich. You also have enslaved people that are taken out west by their enslavers. And, this causes a little bit of tension because California gets admitted to the United States as a free state, which is wonderful, right? But they also pass a Fugitive Slave Act, which says if you are enslaved and you escape, you self-emancipate, you must be returned to the person who claimed ownership of you. And so, though it's admitted as a free state, really people cannot be truly free in California. There are anecdotes, though, and stories of people who purchased their own freedom or who felt like they just had more freedom out west than they did in the eastern half of the United States. Only 8% of the population is female. Ladies, sorry, we're in the minority. Women that did travel out talked about having greater economic opportunities, but it's mostly single men. And by the height of the gold rush, 68% of the population is American. This is significant because before we were definitely the minority. So how do you think that impacted the landscape and culture of the West? Discrimination becomes the norm, mostly at the hands of American miners. They try to pass laws that ban foreigners from mining from gold. They're not successful, but they do pass a law that says non-Americans have to pay higher taxes, which means lesser profits. Their goal here was to target immigrants and to dissuade them from coming to California. The groups that were the primary targets of this discrimination include Chinese immigrants and Mexican immigrants. And here we have a drawing of Chinese gold miners. There's also problems with cruelty focused on Native Americans and indigenous peoples. So indigenous populations start to dwindle as different groups move into California, even before the gold rush, even as Mexican immigrants start to move there before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed. And then as Americans rush out, conflicts arise. There's butting of heads. There's not only armed conflict, but the spread of disease, and a lot of death results. There are also no laws that protect these indigenous peoples, and men and women and children are basically enslaved and forced to mine for gold and treated in really inhumane and cruel ways, and not compensated for their efforts either. If we focus now again on the gold, it's kind of wild to think about how much is found. Over $2 billion, capital B, billion dollars, are found throughout these gold rush years. That's 750 pounds. I can't even visualize what that looks like. Maybe you can a little bit. My mind, it's like, I can't wrap my mind around that. And there are these pictures that make it seem serene and ideal and picturesque, but we know it's not always so easy. So here's some data that shows how much gold is found and when. This chart is in troy ounces. 14 troy ounces equals about 1 pound of gold. There's a very obvious peak from 49 to 52. So you can see like those red bars there. And this makes sense because we go from a few people not looking for gold to hundreds of thousands actively searching for it. So there's going to be a peak. But then from 52 on, there is a steady decline. That peak in 52 results in about $80 million worth of gold, but then it starts to decline and settles around $45 million a year. But there are people who find nothing at all, and people that lose everything they have trying. Some people are in such rough shape that they don't even have the means to travel back home when they're unsuccessful finding gold, which is a pretty sad reality. Whenever there are these major moments in any nation's history, there are lots of negative and positive effects, some of them expected, some unforeseen. So let's talk about the pros, cons, and lasting impact of the gold rush. We'll start with the negatives. So this statistic is so telling. In 1849, 1 in 5 men that headed to California for the gold rush died. They did not survive. There are a lot of financial risks. You can lose everything you have. There's safety issues. Mining is not safe. You're dealing with rivers, you're dealing with chemicals, you're dealing with explosions, but the Wild West wasn't named that for no good reason. There's a lot of vigilante justice, little rule of law and enforcement of law and order. There's a lot of gunslinging and toting. There are stabbings, there are brawls, there are saloons and opium dens that result in lots of alcoholism and drug addiction. There are a lot of conflicts that are just settled man to man in really violent ways. There's also a lot of suicide. So there are just risks in being in this region in this time. There are also diseases. Camps are unsanitary. Diseases spread very quickly. Things like cholera, dysentery, and smallpox that take a lot of lives. There are the inequities and racism that we talked about, though they impact some groups more than others. And there are environmental impacts, logging and deforestation that ruin natural habitats, sediments from mining that clog up riverbeds and streams, and arguments over water rights start to erupt as dams are created that artificially redirect the flow of water. But there are positives too that we cannot deny. When people come to an area, there is development, which can be good. There are opportunities, business ventures, the chance to strike it rich. And moving out west sparked innovation. One of my favorite stories is that of Levi Strauss, my favorite jean manufacturer. Levi Strauss traveled out west for the gold rush and started a dry goods store. And a few years later, designed and patented the riveted blue jean, the working man's pant that would hold up to mining. And Levi Strauss jeans still exist today. There is cultural diversity. It's imperfect. We talked about that, but there's something to be said for a place where people from all walks of life in different regions can come together. And there's also a lot of infrastructure development, the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, building of bridges and dams and roadways. And actually, we credit the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad to the immigrants that came to California, a lot of Irish immigrants and Chinese immigrants that worked as railroad workers. So good and bad. That's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully you learned something new or interesting about the gold rush that you can use in our subsequent lessons. Take care.